In the blink of an eye, my dream of owning a little piece of the countryside right in the suburbs turned into an egg war with explosive consequences. It all started when my wife and I finally bought our first home, a charming townhouse in Oak Ridge Gardens, a leafy neighborhood with clean streets and well-kept gardens. Subscribe to the channel and hit like for more stories like this. How about we get some chickens? I asked my wife while we were checking out the spacious backyard on moving day. She looked at me like I'd just suggested building a roller coaster. Chickens? Here? This isn't a farm, honey. But the idea had already taken root in my head. Ever since I was a kid visiting my grandparents in the countryside, I dreamed of having my own chickens. There was something magical about collecting fresh eggs every morning, like little daily gifts from nature. Before making any rash decisions, I did my homework. I checked the city laws, which allowed up to 6 chickens per household in our area, as long as they were kept a certain distance from the neighbors' houses. Then I carefully reviewed our Homeowners Association (HOA) rules. Surprisingly, there was no specific ban on domestic birds, only vague rules about maintaining the neighborhood's aesthetics and avoiding disturbances. With the regulations on my side, I convinced my wife to give it a shot. Let's try with 4 chickens, I proposed. If there's a problem, we'll find them a new home. I spent the next few weeks designing and building what I consider a masterpiece of a chicken coop. It was well insulated, airy, safe from predators and, most importantly, aesthetically pleasing. I painted it the same color as our house and added architectural details that matched the neighborhood style. No one could say it clashed with the aesthetic of Oak Ridge Gardens. When the coop was done, I got 4 chickens, 2 golden buff Orpingtons and 2 multicolored Amaroccanas, famous for their blue-green toned eggs. I gave them names of TV show characters: Phoebe, Monica, Rachel, and Daenerys. My wife rolled her eyes at the names, but I soon noticed she talked to the chickens when she thought I wasn't around. A month later, the magic happened. Our very first batch of eggs. The Orpingtons produced classic brown eggs, while the Amaroccanas gifted us those beautiful blue-green eggs that looked like works of art. My wife, who was initially reluctant about the idea, now made a point of preparing breakfast with the freshest eggs in the world, as she liked to say. It was on a sunny Saturday morning that I first met Laura, the president of our HOA. I was feeding my chickens when I noticed a woman around 50 years old, with perfectly styled hair, standing by the fence of my backyard, watching. "Good morning," I greeted with a smile. "Are those chickens in your backyard?" she asked, without returning the smile. I introduced myself and explained about my new backyard companions. I checked all the rules beforehand. The city allows it and there's nothing in the HOA regulations that forbids it. Laura pursed her lips and adjusted her sunglasses. "I'm Laura Reynolds, the association's president. And even though there isn't a specific ban, we have expectations on how residents maintain their properties. I made sure to build a pretty coop that matches the house," I explained, proudly pointing to my creation. "And I guarantee everything is clean and quiet. The neighbors don't even know they're here, except for the fact that I started handing out fresh eggs." Laura smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see how long that lasts. Have a good day." In the following weeks, I noticed something strange. The number of eggs we collected didn't add up, especially the blue-green ones. At first, I thought maybe one of the Amaroccanas was stressed. But then I began to see a pattern: the eggs were disappearing mainly during the night or in the early hours of the morning. Curious and a bit worried, I set up a small, discreet security camera in the coop, connected to my cell phone. Maybe it was a wild animal or a nosy neighbor. The last thing I expected to see was Laura, the HOA president, sneaking into my backyard at 5:30 in the morning, opening the coop and carefully picking only the blue-green eggs, tucking them into a small thermal bag. Watching those images on my phone left me completely stunned. The president of our HOA, the person who was supposed to be the model of rule following and respect for others' property, was breaking into my backyard to steal eggs. And not just any eggs, only the blue-green ones from my Amaroccanas. My initial outrage quickly turned into a kind of scientific curiosity. Why did she want those eggs so badly? Were they for her own consumption, to sell, or was there something else? I showed the video to my wife while we had our coffee. "This is trespassing," she exclaimed, indignant. "We're calling the police." I considered the idea for a moment, but something told me there might be a more creative solution to our problem. Laura clearly loved those blue-green eggs. What if we could use that to our advantage? "I've got a better idea," I replied with a smile that my wife immediately recognized as my troublemaking smile. "Oh no, I know that look. What are you up to?" "Something special for our friend Laura. Something explosive." My plan was ingeniously simple. I remembered an old egg preservation technique my grandpa taught me when I was a kid, preserving eggs in lime water. This technique, used before modern refrigeration, involves submerging eggs in a saturated solution of calcium hydroxide, sealing the shell's pores. Eggs preserved this way develop a particularly pungent smell over time, especially if left at room temperature. That afternoon, after work, I stopped by a hardware store to buy quicklime. At the supermarket, I grabbed a dozen regular eggs, the cheapest I could find. At home, I prepared my lime water solution in a plastic bucket and submerged the eggs. According to my grandpa, you needed to wait at least 2 weeks for the eggs to start developing that special aroma. During that waiting period, I kept monitoring Laura's activities. Like clockwork, she showed up twice a week, always between 5:30 and 6 o'clock in the morning, for her little egg harvest. I began leaving only 2 or 3 blue-green eggs in the coop, keeping the rest inside the house. I didn't want her suspecting anything before my surprise was ready. After 2 weeks, it was time to check on my projectiles. With rubber gloves and a mask, I learned back in college that these eggs were no joke. I took one egg out of the solution and brought it to the backyard. Using a fine needle, I made a tiny, almost imperceptible hole in the shell. The goal was to let the gas from the decomposing egg slowly escape when it was in a warmer environment, like a kitchen. A crucial detail, I needed these eggs to look identical to those laid by my Amaroccanas. I bought blue and green food coloring and experimented with several combinations until I found the perfect shade. The dyeing process was meticulous. Using a cotton swab, I applied thin layers of color and let them dry between each application. The result was impressive. Even I, who knew it was a ruse, would have had trouble telling my special eggs apart from the real ones. I prepared half a dozen of these gifts for Laura. Each one with a small puncture, delicately dyed to mimic the precious blue-green eggs. The next morning, I woke up very early and placed them in the coop, removing the real eggs from my chickens. At 5:42 in the morning, the security camera notified me of movement. I watched, with a mix of anxiety and satisfaction, as Laura stealthily entered my backyard. She opened the coop just like she had done so many times before, picked up the special eggs and carefully stowed them in her thermal bag. Her expression of contentment was clear even in the low-light recording. Now all that was left was to wait. I figured that Laura would probably save the eggs for the weekend, maybe for a special brunch to impress a guest. The thought made me smile. The confrontation came much sooner than I expected. The next afternoon, I was mowing the lawn when a white Lexus SUV screeched to a halt in front of my house. Laura got out of the car like a storm, her face red with anger, striding toward me. "What did you do?" she shouted, completely ignoring the fact that we were in the middle of the street, with neighbors possibly watching. I turned off the lawnmower and raised my eyebrows in feigned surprise. "Good afternoon, Laura. What are you talking about? Don't act like you don't know." Those eggs, those disgusting eggs, she was trembling with rage. "They exploded in my kitchen. The smell is unbearable. I had to cancel my lunch with the country club board." I kept a neutral expression, as if I were genuinely confused. "My eggs exploded? How could that be? And how would you even know about my chicken's eggs?" That made her pause for a moment, realizing the trap she was falling into. "You know exactly what you did," she said, her tone retreating slightly but still furious. "Laura," I said calmly, "if you're suggesting that somehow you got eggs from my coop and they caused problems in your kitchen, maybe we should discuss exactly how those eggs ended up in your possession." Her face went through a fascinating transformation, from anger to calculation, and then to a failed attempt at dignified indignation. "Are you accusing me of something?" "I'm not accusing. I'm stating the facts." I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket. "I have recordings of you entering my backyard at 5:30 every morning over the past 3 weeks. I believe this is trespassing and theft." I paused. I imagine the HOA board would be very interested in these images. Laura's face visibly paled. "This is absurd. You have no proof. Would you like to watch the videos now, or would you prefer a more private setting?" She fell silent for a few seconds, clearly weighing her options. "This isn't going to end like this," she finally said, turning on her heel and heading back to her car. Before getting in, she turned around again. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." And truly, I had no idea what was coming next. The following week, I received my first HOA notice. Apparently, my chicken coop violated the maximum height for accessory structures rule. The rule limited these structures to 1.80 meters, and my coop was 1.85 meters. The fine was $150, with 14 days to make adjustments. I was impressed with the accuracy of the measurement. Someone had actually come with a tape measure to check my coop. I reduced the height as requested and paid the fine, thinking that would put an end to the matter. 2 days later, I got another notice. This time, the color of the coop was in disagreement with the approved palette for accessory constructions. The fine was $200. "This is ridiculous," my wife said after reading the notice. "The coop is exactly the same color as our house, which was approved when we bought it." "Yeah, but it's not in the approved palette for accessory constructions," I replied, citing the document. "Apparently, there's a specific palette for each type of structure." In the next 30 days, we received notifications about the improper slope of the coop's roof, excessive noise from the chickens, even though our immediate neighbors had signed declarations saying they barely even noticed the birds, offensive odors, despite the fact that we cleaned the coop daily, a living fence that was 3 centimeters taller than allowed, the color of our mailbox, which apparently had been approved by the previous committee, but not by the current one. The fines added up to almost $1,000, and every new letter bore the elegant signature of Laura Reynolds, president of Oak Ridge Gardens Homeowners Association. "She's on a revenge mission," my wife said during dinner after we received the 6th notice. "We can't go on like this." I agreed. The situation had gotten out of hand, and the worst part was now it wasn't just about us. I began noticing similar patterns of harassment toward other neighbors. Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly lady living 2 houses down, was in tears in her garden when I dropped off some eggs, the real ones, of course. The rose bushes she'd nurtured for 15 years, her pride and joy, had been declared unapproved invasive species, and she'd been ordered to remove them in 72 hours, or face a $500 fine. In the same week, the Jackson family, who had a handicapped son, received a notice about the wheelchair ramp they had installed. Apparently, the material used wasn't on the list of approved materials, even though it was the recommended one for maximum durability and safety. Something needed to be done. It wasn't just about stolen eggs or a coop 5 centimeters over the regulation anymore. It was about abuse of power and systematic intimidation. "We need to dig deeper," I said to my wife. "Laura can't be acting alone. There's an entire system that allows her to do this." I started doing discreet research. I talked to neighbors, went through past HOA meeting minutes, and carefully studied the complete association regulations. What I discovered was even more disturbing than I had imagined. My investigations revealed an unsettling pattern that went far beyond missing chickens and stolen eggs. Laura Reynolds wasn't just an overly nosy neighbor with a thirst for power, she had turned our homeowners association into her little kingdom, where she ruled with an iron fist for almost 5 years. First, I discovered that the HOA meetings, which were supposed to be open to all residents, were strategically scheduled at impossible times, Mondays at 2 p.m., when most owners were at work. The notices for these meetings were posted only on the clubhouse bulletin board in tiny letters, technically meeting the notification requirement, but effectively limiting attendance. I kept digging and found something even more concerning. The Architectural Review Committee, in charge of approving or denying property modifications, was composed of Laura and two of her close friends, a retired couple who rarely questioned her decisions. The rules were enforced inconsistently, with strictness for some and leniency for others, apparently based on personal alliances or grudges. The most alarming discovery came when I managed to review the association's financial reports. Thanks to a retired accountant who lived at the end of the street and still had connections in the city records department, we got hold of the reports that should have been available to all homeowners but mysteriously were never distributed. "Look at this," said Mr. Peterson, the accountant, pointing at a series of expenses labeled common area maintenance. In the last 3 years, these expenses have increased by 300%, with no visible improvements in the common areas. And check out this service company, Reynolds Landscape Solutions. Reynolds? Like Laura Reynolds. Exactly. A company registered under her son's name. And guess who signs off on these payments? The information was explosive. Laura was essentially siphoning funds from the HOA to a family-run company, using her position to approve overpriced contracts without proper bidding. Our condo fees, which had increased 15% the previous year due to rising maintenance costs, were directly feeding the Reynolds family financial empire. Armed with this explosive information, I began to craft a plan. It wouldn't be enough to simply expose Laura. She had allies on the board who could easily discredit isolated accusations. We needed a coordinated approach. Over the following weeks, I organized discreet meetings with other neighbors affected by Laura's arbitrary policies. First in small groups at my living room, then in larger gatherings at the neighborhood park. With each meeting, more people showed up, each with their own story of intimidation, unfair fines, and harassment. Mrs. Rodriguez brought documents showing that the roses she grew were exactly the approved variety from the HOA landscaping manual. The father of the handicapped boy, who happened to be a lawyer, explained that the demand to remove the wheelchair ramp could violate federal accessibility laws. A young family showed photos documenting how their request to install solar panels was denied without explanation, while Laura's brother's vacation home had received approval for the same system in record time. "What amazes me," commented Mr. Patel, a university professor who lived on the corner, "is how we all thought we were the only ones being targeted. Each of us thought we had done something to personally annoy her." "That's how tyrants operate," replied the lawyer. "They isolate people, making each one think they're fighting alone." With an ever-growing group of dissatisfied homeowners, almost 60% of the condo owners had joined our movement, we started planning our confrontation. Timing was crucial. The annual HOA meeting was approaching, the one meeting that, by statute, couldn't have its date or time changed, and required a minimum quorum to validate any decisions. Meanwhile, my chicken's eggs had become an unlikely symbol of resistance. At every meeting, I would bring a dozen fresh eggs, the same ones Laura so coveted, and hand them out to everyone. The eggs of the revolution, someone joked, and the name caught on. The strategy for the annual meeting was meticulously planned. The lawyer reviewed the association's bylaws and identified that we could call for a vote of no confidence against any board member if we presented a petition signed by at least 40% of the homeowners. We got 65%. 3 days before the meeting, we sent formal notifications to all the owners, not just small notices on the clubhouse board, but letters sent individually to each residence informing them of the importance of attending the annual meeting and the serious issues that would be discussed. On the night of the meeting, the community hall was packed like never before. Familiar and unfamiliar faces, homeowners who normally didn't get involved, all were there, curious about what was going on. Laura looked visibly rattled at the sight of the crowd, but she maintained her composure, trying to run the meeting as if it were just another normal day. When we reached the other matters item on the agenda, I asked for the floor. "I have some questions about our association's financial management that I'd like to discuss," I began calmly. Laura tried to interrupt. "Financial issues must be submitted in writing to the treasurer with at least 30 days notice." "Actually," interjected Mr. Peterson, the retired accountant, "the bylaws allow financial issues to be raised in a general meeting if there is suspicion of irregularities. Section 8, Paragraph 3. Laura paled slightly as I projected the financial reports we had obtained on the wall, highlighting the contracts with Reynolds Landscape Solutions and the inexplicable increases in maintenance expenses. As you can see, I continued, maintaining a professional tone, there are serious issues regarding conflicts of interest and potential misuse of association funds. The room exploded with murmurs and exclamations. Laura banged her gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. "These are baseless and potentially defamatory accusations," she shouted. "You have no idea about the legal and administrative processes required to keep this community running." Speaking of processes, the lawyer interrupted, standing up, "We would also like to discuss the selective and arbitrary enforcement of the HOA rules." One by one, neighbors stood up to share their stories. Mrs. Rodriguez with her roses. The family with the wheelchair ramp. The couple with the rejected solar panel application. And me, with my chickens and the story of the stolen eggs, complete with screenshots of the security footage showing Laura breaking into my property. "I don't have time for this nonsense." Laura finally exploded, totally losing her composure. "You have no idea how hard it is to keep this place in order. Without me, this condominium would be a chaos of mismatched house colors and unkempt gardens." A heavy silence fell over the room after her outburst. It was Mr. Patel who finally spoke, his calm voice contrasting sharply with the earlier commotion. "Ms. Reynolds, we bought homes here, not prison cells. A homeowners association exists to maintain reasonable standards and property values, not to terrorize people who just want to live peacefully in their own homes." Spontaneous applause broke out. When silence returned, the lawyer stood up again. "In accordance with our association's bylaws, we hereby submit a formal petition for a vote of no confidence against the current president, supported by 65% of the homeowners. We request that this vote be held immediately." Laura looked around, clearly searching for allies, but found only determined faces. Even her two loyal friends from the Architectural Review Committee looked uncomfortable, avoiding her gaze. The vote was taken and the result was overwhelming, 88% in favor of removing Laura as HOA president. "This is a coup," she shouted, gathering her things. "You'll regret this. I'll sue every single one of you for defamation." As she stormed out, the vice president, a retired gentleman who rarely spoke at meetings, took over. "I propose that we form a review committee to examine all policies and financial decisions from the past 5 years, he said, looking relieved to finally be able to speak. "And I suggest we establish new procedures to ensure transparency and participation by all homeowners in the association's decisions." The proposal was unanimously approved. By the end of the night, we had a transition committee made up of 5 homeowners from different parts of the condominium, including the retired accountant to analyze the finances and the lawyer to review legal matters. Subscribe to the channel and hit like for more stories like this. When the meeting ended, many neighbors who barely knew each other were animatedly talking, exchanging phone numbers, and planning community gatherings. Something had fundamentally changed that night. It wasn't just about taking down a tyrant, it was about rebuilding a true sense of community. Mrs. Rodriguez came up to me while I was gathering my papers. "Your chickens saved our neighborhood," she said with a smile. "Who would have thought that eggs could spark a revolution?"